So I would like to welcome our wonderful presenter, Delane Ingalls Vanada. She's in Art Education and Visual Studies. Today she is going to be talking about learner-centered strategies. That is the chapter that she wrote on in the book that we were discussing. And she is our fabulous kickoff for this webinar series. So I'll be making her the presenter shortly. And what the framework for today is we're going to have about 20 minutes of presentation from Delane, and then we'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes for any sort of questions. So let's start there. And once again, if you have any sort of problems, please call that help number. So Delane, I am switching it over to you. Delane, I can't quite hear you if you're talking, so if you could check your mic, please, again. There we go. Now I hear something.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Much better. There we go, Delane. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. All right. Sorry about that.
All good.
Yeah, we want to talk today about learner-centered instructional strategies and theory, and that's the chapter that we wrote in the book, and at the last page of this webinar you'll see the link to it, so you'll have access to it. And I wrote this chapter together with Jean Adams from the College of Art and Architecture. This quote by Beatty is really coming from the idea, also you may have heard it, the aim of education should be to teach us rather how to think than what to think, rather to improve our minds so as to enable us to think for ourselves. If we talk about what 21st century learners need, these are some of the things that research tells us and that experience tells us. Students need to be able to think in critical, creative, and practical ways, that balance piece, to be culturally competent, to be collaborators, independent and adaptive thinkers, connection makers, to be self-directed, self-motivated, and risk takers. And the three that you see starred, I'd like to highlight. We know that students need to be able to collaborate with one another. That they need to be self-directed. Is it still hard to hear me? Okay. Okay. And this is something we see often in our classes. The complaint in K through 12 as well, that students have difficulty self-directing. We often see them want you to hold their hands and tell them that they're doing it right. They're used to one right answer. And that leads over into the courage to fail and the need for students to wrestle with ambiguity, to take risks. So if we want to foster these independent, more innovative critical thinkers who can collaborate with others and make connections to solve today's complex problems, we need to talk about what we call the learner-centered paradigm shift. Rather than students being told what to think, a more passive way of learning, switch to how to think, to raise more active and generative thinkers. The paradigm shift in learner-centeredness really comes from the quote at the bottom. The motto for learner-centeredness is that the one who does the work does the learning. That learning does involve work, and students really are not used to being the ones put in charge of their own learning. So the questions we're asking today: how might teachers design learning experiences that help develop more innovative and critical thinkers, promote inquiry-driven and connected learning, and more collaboration that prepares them for the real world? Supporting these ideas is Sternberg's initial work on successful intelligence. I don't know if you've heard of Sternberg's work, probably one of the most widely published researchers in education and educational theory. He talks about how students need to have this balance of creative, practical, and critical skills. But what we also know is that skills aren't enough. Students need the ready, willing, and ableness, the dispositions to be creative, to be practical, to be critical thinkers. So the undergirding learner-centeredness is this idea. And there are three pillars to learner-centered pedagogy. Inquiry-driven learning, self-directed learning, putting students more in charge of their own learning, and connection making. That integrated piece, what the brain wants to do is to make sense of information and disparate information to bring connections to their learning. And inherently, learner-centered, LC, I've called it here, is a constructivist notion. Knowledge is constructed, not absorbed. So again, thinking about inquiry-driven and self-directed learning. Thinking in terms of generative themes, that students can be self-directed in learning as you guide them. And the idea that students demonstrate their understanding, not just memorize facts, that they need to do to learn. And at any point, please raise your hand. Jessica can manage that, and I'm happy for you to interject or share your thoughts as we go along here. So we look at this shift from a traditional classroom to more learner-centered classrooms. One of the key things is that instead of such a focus on the end product, it has more of a focus on process and developing thinking and reflection and the culture that's required. So those, if you look at this list on the left of more traditional classrooms, a couple of them that I will highlight. If you look at a culture of one right answer and knowing, many of us as researchers, as teachers, understand that we have had a culture based on standardized testing, kind of history in the classroom of students having the idea that they have to be right and that there's one right answer rather than divergent thinking and developing a culture of questioning. So you'll hear me talk about that again. Instead of a fragmented, siloed curriculum where math is just taught as math and English is English and art is art, what a learner-centered classroom moves toward is more interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and integrated learning. So if we look at some of the methods, I'm going to breeze through kind of what to do, what to expect. If you develop this more active classroom, a learner-centered classroom, what we know is that you can expect some pushback from students. That again, they're used to a lot of hand-holding, one right answer, not used to dealing with ambiguity, or taking those kind of risks. They feel uncomfortable in letting go of the content, but teachers feel uncomfortable in letting go of the content as well. Not that content is gone, but that you become more of a guide. Also, it takes time to develop mutual trust and creative confidence. And lastly, you will see reward, deeper learning and motivation among students. So let's just look at that piece right now, the motivation piece. Well, that's right, I have an arrow. So, if you are familiar with Daniel Pink's work, he also wrote A Whole New Mind. His book on motivation is called Drive. He talks about the three pieces of developing motivation in learning: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I really think those are connected to what the learner-centered principles are. This idea of developing the learner's autonomy, their self-direction. Mastery happens a combination, but connection making certainly helps. And that purpose really comes from asking questions. So these are some of the strategies we talk about in the book. And they're not just strategies. I would say that largely they're also theories and ways of thinking and teaching and learning. So we talk about role-playing, simulation, debate, and case studies as a way of bringing both collaboration and discussion and inquiry into the classroom. Writing to learn, using writing much more in terms of journaling, in terms of reflection in the classroom. Small group and team-based strategies. Assessment of learning, problem and project-based learning, design-based learning, and the flipped classroom. So we're going to talk about a few of these. I know I don't have very much time, and you can read more in the chapter. You are probably familiar with this term of the flipped classroom. We have some fabulous researchers here at UNC Charlotte that are implementing this in their classrooms. So it is a pedagogical model where typical lecture and homework elements of a course are reversed. So students do view video lectures, do class work to prepare for the class, and while they're in class, the time is devoted more to exercises, projects, and discussions. Project-based learning, kind of what it says. It's often more project-focused. So, and a little more teacher-directed than what we're going to talk about for problem-based learning. Students are presented with driving questions. Usually the teacher is the one coming up with the driving questions that they investigate over an extended period of time. Voice and choice are given. Students may take their projects in different directions based on these driving questions, often about big issues, and then ending critiques. Problem-based learning, ideally students are the ones finding the problems. They, around a certain topic or around a certain area of content in the curriculum, they are finding things that they are truly interested in investigating. So they start with asking, finding these problems, defining them, investigating, researching more, finding possible solutions. It includes both self-directed and coached learning. So when I say that, I mean that for both project and problem-based learning, it's not totally student self-directed. Teachers are demonstrating, coaching, sharing information too. And then this is shared out and students demonstrate what they have found out. As a part of this, mind mapping, webbing is really helpful. So this is based on an artist, Rebecca Didamenko, since that's my primary field, and taking various areas that helping students think in various ways, to think divergently and how to make connections. In this case, we're looking at the connections to scientific, technological, religion, social, political, artistic, aesthetic, and intellectual or philosophical. Another example would be connection making to various disciplines. So wherever you start, in this case, we started with an artist, and she's an environmental awareness artist, looking at the connections to other disciplines as a way to get students to think about and think divergently. This one's just sort of a funny one about coffee, but it's surprising to me how difficult this can be for students at first, but then they end up really using it on their own. The next one I want to talk about is design thinking. And don't know if you're familiar with design thinking. This particular model comes from Stanford's D School. So it's widely used in business, in multidisciplinary learning situations. But the D School has also developed what they call design thinking for educators. The idea that teachers are designers, that we are always designing curriculum, designing designing learning and thinking. But in this case, if we think about design thinking for students and using it in the classroom, these are the basic steps. Design thinking is both a mindset and a human-centered collaborative problem-solving process. So students work in teams. They learn the process. Teacher largely guides their process and provides supports in the various areas they're connecting to. It's very nonlinear. Students are thinking wide, they're thinking narrow, they are so divergently, but also they're doing a lot of synthesis. So in the process, this empathy piece at first is taking students out to research human needs around a problem that they, so it's very connected to problem-based learning. They interview, they observe, they try to get inside the need of someone else. Then they work to define the problem and ask, how might we questions? Ideating, brainstorming around those questions is the next step in order to generate ideas, lots of ideas. And then they synthesize and create prototypes around decisions that they've made in solving this problem, and then test the problem, and they also communicate and demonstrate it to others. So I'm interested to hear if others are, if you are familiar with design thinking. Just let you, this is from a chapter that I wrote in Dynamic Learning, Inquiry, and Sense Making through Design Thinking. I developed a course here at UNC Charlotte called Critical and Creative Thinking. In art education, I often have students come into that class from other disciplines, and we research and look at practice design thinking in the classroom. So just in ending, we ask you to imagine your classroom learning culture and how you might foster creative and critical thinkers by rethinking some of these following things that have to do with learner-centeredness. One thing I didn't talk a lot about, and is more described more in the chapter, is the idea of shared power. That in a learner-centered classroom, you are putting students more in charge of their learning, but you as the teacher also take a different position in being the guide. So we call that shared power. Student choice and agency, balance skills, disposition, intrinsic motivation. So some references for you, and if you go down here, there is the link to the faculty guide, our book, and the chapters. So I would love to hear some of your questions. Let me go to here. I can't hear you, but would like to be able to.
All righty, so now we have some time for questions. You can type your questions below in the chat if you wish, or say hello, or I have a question and I'll happily unmute you, or you can unmute yourself to ask a question. But who would like to? Carla, did yours go up? If you had risen your hand, do it again. Not seeing any messages. Give another moment, see if anyone has any following questions.
So I see from Shaw talking about how you are interested in doing this with your students next semester. So how best to implement a learner-centered environment. I think to start small is a good place. If you're interested in using design thinking, of course, to be trained yourself is critical. To then train your students is the next step, because ideally they are driving their learning in these teams as they make the decisions through the problem-solving process. Many of the others, if you read our chapter, we've given you some good resources to go to that will help you. Flipped classroom, some more team-based strategies. Each of the things I've mentioned have links to resources that might help you. But also, I'm here. I'm glad to help.
Okay. Well, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your interest, which is fantastic. One of the things that we like to end with, just for a little bit of fun, is pick a favorite dessert from the following screen that I've shown. This is something Sam does at the end of each of his webinars. The good news is you'll probably be having something tasty for Christmas soon, so hopefully we're not torturing you too much. But go ahead and type down below which one would be your favorite choice. If you had to pick one, which would it be? And then, of course, as Delane mentioned, she is here to help. I also want to mention that she is one of the faculty in our new TOP program, Teachers Observing Peers. So if you'd like to visit Delane's class and actually see her put some of this in action, we do have a form to sign up to visit her. Be happy to give that information out to anyone. And it's called the TOP program, Teachers Observing Peers. You can find it on the CTL website and talk with her a little bit more about this topic or other topics, how she teaches.
Yes, you are welcome to join me.
And of course, we do have some other upcoming webinars. One is my favorite Canvas tools. Oh, that says November 17th. I think we've already passed that. But I will mention that the next webinar in this particular series for the book is going to be on January 27th. That's going to be with Pedram Lelabadi, and that covers writing a course syllabus. So if you have any interest in that, please come back. You can sign up for it the same way you did this. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.